Austin Reed was just 14 when he vanished collecting firewood. What his father didn't know, Austin had witnessed something he shouldn't have, and the killer had been watching their family for 14 years, living right down the road. What Austin saw will haunt you. The crisp October air of 2001 carried the scent of pine needles and wood smoke as Nathan Reed loaded his pickup truck with camping gear, fishing rods, and enough supplies for what he hoped would be the perfect father-son weekend. At 45, Nathan understood that opportunities to bond with his teenage sons were becoming increasingly rare. Austin, at 14, was already showing signs of typical teenage independence, while 12-year-old Tyler still looked up to his father with the kind of admiration that Nathan knew wouldn't last forever. Nathan had been planning this camping trip for months, carefully selecting a remote spot near Crystal Lake in the Oregon wilderness where cell phone signals couldn't reach, and the only sounds were rushing water and rustling leaves. This would be their escape from the modern world, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other in ways that seemed impossible back home in their suburban neighborhood of Millfield. The Reed family had moved to Millfield 3 years earlier when Nathan accepted a promotion at the lumber company where he worked as a forest management specialist. The town was perfect for raising children, with tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and the kind of small-town atmosphere where everyone knew everyone else's business. Nathan's wife, Sarah, had fallen in love with their modest two-story house on Maple Street, especially the large backyard where the boys could play safely. But what Nathan didn't realize was that this same sense of security, this trust in their peaceful community, would become the very thing that made his family vulnerable to a predator who had been watching them since the day they arrived. The drive to Crystal Lake took just over 2 hours, winding through increasingly dense forest until they reached the turnoff for the campground. Austin sat in the passenger seat, his dark hair falling across his eyes as he stared out the window, while Tyler bounced excitedly in the back seat, pointing out every deer and hawk he spotted along the way. "Dad, can we fish for trout first thing tomorrow morning?" Tyler asked, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Absolutely," Nathan replied, glancing at Austin through the rearview mirror. "What about you, Austin? Ready to show your little brother how it's done?" Austin managed a small smile. At 14, he was caught between childhood and adolescence, sometimes joining in Tyler's excitement and other times maintaining the cool distance that seemed to be part of growing up. He had been reluctant about this camping trip initially, preferring to spend the weekend with friends or playing video games. But Nathan had insisted, sensing that this might be one of their last opportunities for this kind of family bonding, before Austin became too old and independent to participate willingly. They arrived at the campsite just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the lake's surface in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The campground was nearly empty, with only 2 other sites occupied by families who were already settling in for the evening. Nathan felt a sense of satisfaction as he watched his sons work together to set up their tent, their earlier siblings' squabbles forgotten in the excitement of the outdoor adventure. The campsite Nathan had chosen was positioned on a slight rise overlooking the lake, surrounded by towering pine trees that provided natural privacy and wind protection. There was a stone fire ring already in place, along with a weathered picnic table and a cleared area perfect for their tent. The nearest bathroom facilities were about a quarter-mile away, and the camp host's trailer was visible across the lake, far enough to provide solitude but close enough for emergency assistance if needed. The first night passed peacefully. They roasted marshmallows over their campfire, told ghost stories that made Tyler giggle nervously, and listened to the haunting call of loons across the water. Nathan felt a deep contentment watching his boys' faces illuminated by the flickering flames, their eyes bright with wonder and happiness. These were the moments he had been hoping for, the memories that would last long after his sons had grown up and started families of their own. But someone else was watching too. From a distance, hidden among the trees, a figure observed the Reed family through binoculars, noting their campsite location, their vehicle, and most importantly, their daily routines. This wasn't a chance encounter or random sighting. This was surveillance that had been going on for much longer than Nathan could have possibly imagined. Marcus Webb had been planning this for weeks. As a maintenance worker for the county parks department, he had legitimate access to campground records and reservation systems. He knew exactly when the Reed family would be arriving, what site they had reserved, and how long they planned to stay. More importantly, he knew that this isolated location would provide the perfect opportunity to finally act on obsessions that had been growing stronger for months. Marcus had been watching the Reed family since they moved to Millfield 3 years earlier. At first, it had been casual observation, the kind of neighbor watching that occurs naturally in small communities. But gradually, his interest had become more focused and more disturbing. He had begun timing his yard work to coincide with the boys' outdoor activities, positioning himself where he could observe their routines and interactions. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with a thin layer of frost covering their tent and a mist rising from the lake's surface. Nathan woke early, as was his habit, and started a small fire to warm coffee and prepare breakfast. The boys were still sleeping soundly in their shared sleeping bag, and Nathan allowed himself a few moments of quiet reflection as he watched the sunrise paint the sky in soft pastels. By the time Austin and Tyler emerged from the tent, rubbing sleep from their eyes and shivering in the morning air, Nathan had bacon sizzling in a cast-iron pan and coffee brewing in a battered metal pot that had accompanied him on countless camping trips over the years. "Smells amazing," Austin said, and Nathan noticed that his older son seemed more relaxed than he had in months. Away from the pressures of high school, girlfriend drama, and the constant pull of video games and television, Austin was returning to the enthusiastic boy Nathan remembered from earlier years. They spent the morning fishing from the shoreline, with Tyler catching his first trout, and Austin patiently helping his younger brother learn to cast without tangling his line. Nathan felt a profound sense of gratitude for these simple moments, recognizing them as the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. Austin seemed to be enjoying himself genuinely, laughing at Tyler's excitement and offering encouragement when the younger boy's casting attempts went awry. The fish were biting well that morning, and by noon they had caught enough trout for dinner. Nathan cleaned the fish while the boys explored the immediate area around their campsite, collecting interesting rocks and examining animal tracks in the soft earth near the water's edge. It was exactly the kind of peaceful, educational outdoor experience that Nathan had hoped to provide for his sons. But by afternoon, as the temperature dropped and clouds began gathering overhead, Nathan realized they would need more firewood to keep warm through what promised to be a cold night. They had brought some wood from home, but it was already running low after their morning fire and the previous evening's campfire. The wood they had purchased at a gas station during their drive was not burning efficiently, and Nathan estimated they would need at least twice as much to maintain an adequate fire throughout the evening. "I'll go collect some deadfall," Austin volunteered, already reaching for his jacket. "There's plenty of dry wood just up that trail." Nathan looked toward the trail Austin was indicating. It led up a gentle slope through dense forest, disappearing around a bend about a quarter-mile from their campsite. The area looked safe enough, and Austin was a responsible teenager who had been hiking and camping since he was Tyler's age. Nathan had taught both boys wilderness safety from an early age, and Austin knew the basic rules about staying on marked trails and being aware of his surroundings. "Stay on the main trail," Nathan instructed, "and be back before dark. We want to get a good fire going before the temperature really drops." "No problem, Dad," Austin replied, shouldering a small backpack and grabbing a folding saw from their camping supplies. "I'll probably be back in an hour." Nathan watched his son disappear into the forest, feeling a brief moment of parental anxiety that he quickly dismissed. Austin was capable and careful, and the trail was well marked and relatively short. There was no reason to worry. The area was known to be safe, with no dangerous wildlife or terrain hazards that would pose a significant risk to an experienced young hiker. But Austin Reed would never return from that simple firewood gathering mission, and the next 14 years would become a nightmare of searching, hoping, and slowly losing faith in the possibility that their family would ever be whole again. What Nathan didn't know was that Marcus Webb had been waiting in the forest since dawn, positioned along the trail system where he could observe the Reed family's activities and wait for an opportunity to approach one of the boys alone. Marcus had studied the campground layout extensively and knew exactly which trails provided the most privacy and the least chance of being observed by other campers or park personnel. Austin followed the main trail for about 15 minutes, enjoying the solitude and the sounds of the forest around him. The trail was well maintained and clearly marked, winding through a beautiful section of old-growth pine and fir trees. Austin felt confident and independent, pleased that his father trusted him with this responsibility and enjoying the chance to contribute meaningfully to their camping experience. He found a good area for collecting deadfall about a quarter-mile from the campsite, where several large trees had fallen during recent storms, creating an abundance of dry, seasoned wood that would burn well. Austin began cutting suitable pieces with his folding saw, working methodically and safely as his father had taught him. That's when he heard voices coming from a clearing just off the main trail. Austin initially assumed he was hearing other campers, but something about the tone and content of the conversation made him pause and listen more carefully. The voices were tense and secretive, discussing something about packages and delivery schedules in a way that didn't sound like normal camping conversation. Curiosity overcoming caution, Austin quietly approached the edge of the clearing and peered through the undergrowth. What he saw would cost him his life. Marcus Webb was standing in the clearing with two other men, surrounded by several dozen cardboard boxes and plastic containers. Money was changing hands, and Austin could see packages being transferred between vehicles. Even at 14, Austin was smart enough to recognize that he was witnessing some kind of illegal drug transaction. Austin tried to back away quietly, but his movement caught Marcus's attention. Their eyes met across the clearing, and Austin saw recognition flash across Marcus's face. Marcus knew Austin, knew where he lived, knew his family. And Austin had just witnessed something that could destroy Marcus's carefully constructed life. "Hey!" Marcus shouted, but Austin was already running. Austin crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail and heading directly back toward the campsite. He could hear pursuit behind him, but he was young and fast, and he knew these woods better than most teenagers his age. For a moment, he thought he might escape, but Marcus Webb knew these forests even better. As a Parks Department employee, he had spent years learning every trail, every shortcut, every hidden path through the wilderness. He knew exactly where Austin would emerge from the forest, and he was waiting. Austin never had a chance to warn his father or call for help. Marcus attacked him with a brutal efficiency that spoke of careful planning and complete commitment to silence. Austin fought back bravely, but he was overpowered by an adult who was desperate to protect secrets worth killing for. When Austin hadn't returned by sunset, Nathan began to feel the first stirrings of real concern. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and darkness was settling over the forest with the kind of complete blackness that only exists far from city lights. "Where is he?" Tyler asked, his voice small and worried as he helped Nathan scan the tree line with their flashlights. "He probably just got turned around," Nathan replied, trying to keep his own anxiety from showing in his voice. "You know how easy it is to lose track of time when you're in the woods." But as the hours passed and their calls echoed unanswered through the forest, Nathan's concern transformed into genuine fear. He left Tyler at the campsite with strict instructions not to leave the fire and ventured into the woods himself, following the trail Austin had taken and calling his son's name until his voice was hoarse. The trail was easy to follow for the first quarter mile, but then it branched off in several directions, leading deeper into the wilderness. Nathan found some broken branches and disturbed leaves that might have indicated Austin's passage, but in the darkness, it was impossible to be certain. He also discovered the area where Austin had been collecting firewood, evidenced by fresh saw cuts and wood chips scattered on the ground. By midnight, Nathan made the difficult decision to return to their campsite and wait for dawn. Tyler was frightened and cold, despite the warmth of their fire, and Nathan knew that stumbling around in the dark forest would only increase the danger for everyone involved. "Dad, what if something happened to him?" Tyler whispered as they huddled together in their tent, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. "Austin is smart and strong," Nathan replied, wrapping his arm around his younger son. "He probably found shelter somewhere and is waiting for daylight, just like we are." But Nathan didn't believe his own words. Something felt fundamentally wrong about Austin's disappearance. His son was too experienced and responsible to simply get lost or to stay away overnight without finding some way to signal his location. At first light, Nathan left Tyler with some campers at a nearby site and began a systematic search of every trail and possible route Austin might have taken. He found the spot where Austin had apparently been collecting firewood, evidenced by several freshly cut branches and some wood chips from his folding saw. But there was something else at the scene that made Nathan's blood run cold. Austin's backpack was hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground, well above where someone would naturally place it. The pack was empty except for Austin's water bottle, but more disturbing was the way it had been positioned, almost as if it were meant to be found. The placement was too deliberate, too visible to be accidental. Nathan immediately contacted the local authorities using his cell phone, which barely had signal at their remote location. Within hours, the campsite was swarming with search and rescue teams, tracking dogs and Forest Service personnel. The official search effort would continue for 6 days, covering hundreds of square miles of wilderness and involving dozens of volunteers from the local community. The search was extensive and professional. Helicopters scanned the area from above, while ground teams systematically covered every trail and possible route Austin might have taken. Tracking dogs were brought in from 3 different counties, and experienced wilderness rescue specialists used sophisticated equipment to search ravines, caves, and other areas where someone might have fallen or become trapped. They found nothing. No additional evidence of Austin's presence beyond the abandoned backpack. No signs of struggle. No indication of what direction he might have traveled after leaving the woodcutting site. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him whole. But what the searchers didn't know was that Austin Reed had indeed witnessed something that final afternoon, something that would have exposed a secret that certain people were willing to kill to protect. And the person responsible for his disappearance was among the volunteers helping with the search, expressing concern and offering assistance while secretly ensuring that no real evidence would ever be found. Marcus Webb had arrived at the campsite on the second day of the search, introducing himself to Nathan as a concerned neighbor who wanted to help find Austin. He was knowledgeable about the local terrain, helpful with search coordination, and appeared genuinely distressed about Austin's disappearance. Nathan was grateful for Marcus's assistance and impressed by his dedication to the search effort. Marcus spent 3 full days participating in search activities, using his professional knowledge of the forest to guide teams to areas that might otherwise have been overlooked. He was particularly helpful in explaining which areas were most dangerous, which trails were most likely to confuse inexperienced hikers, and which locations should be prioritized for intensive searching. What Nathan didn't realize was that Marcus was systematically misdirecting the search effort, steering teams away from areas where evidence might be found, and ensuring that the most promising leads were never thoroughly investigated. Marcus's apparent expertise and helpfulness made him a trusted member of the search coordination team, giving him access to information and influence over search strategies. The drive home to Millfield was the longest 2 hours of Nathan's life. Tyler sat silently beside him, staring out the window with the kind of 1,000-yard stare that no 12-year-old should ever have to develop. They were returning without Austin, leaving behind only a few personal items and the promise from search teams that they would continue looking for any signs of his son. Sarah was waiting on their front porch when they pulled into the driveway, her face showing the strain of 6 days spent hoping for a phone call that never came. Nathan had called her from the campsite to explain what was happening, but the reality of seeing her husband and younger son return without Austin hit her like a physical blow. "Where is he?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer from their expressions. "We don't know," Nathan replied, his voice breaking as he said the words out loud for the first time. "He just disappeared. The search teams couldn't find any trace of him." The next few weeks passed in a blur of police interviews, search coordination meetings, and media appearances as the story of Austin's disappearance gained regional attention. Nathan found himself torn between hope and despair, spending his days organizing volunteer search parties and his nights lying awake, replaying every moment of that final afternoon and wondering what he could have done differently. The police investigation was thorough but ultimately fruitless. Detective Ray Martinez, the lead investigator assigned to Austin's case, was experienced and compassionate, but he was also realistic about the challenges they faced. The forest is vast, and there are countless ways someone could become lost or injured. Martinez explained during one of his regular updates with the Reed family. "We're dealing with rough terrain, wild animals, and the possibility that Austin might have fallen into a ravine or become trapped somewhere that our search teams haven't been able to access." Detective Martinez was methodical in his investigation, interviewing every person who had been at the campground during the relevant time period, reviewing campground registration records, and coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies to check for any similar disappearances in the region. He also worked with forensic specialists to analyze the physical evidence from Austin's backpack and the woodcutting site, hoping to find clues that might indicate what had happened. But Nathan refused to accept that his son had simply fallen victim to a hiking accident. Austin was too careful and knowledgeable about wilderness safety. There had to be another explanation, something that the investigation was missing. The first anonymous phone call came 3 months after Austin's disappearance. Nathan answered the phone in his home office, expecting to hear from one of the many volunteers who continued to help with search efforts. Instead, he heard heavy breathing and then a voice he didn't recognize, speaking in barely more than a whisper. "Stop looking for your son." The line went dead before Nathan could respond. He immediately contacted Detective Martinez, who arranged for phone monitoring equipment to be installed in the Reed home. But the anonymous caller was careful, using payphones and keeping conversations brief. Over the next 2 years, Nathan received similar calls every few months. Sometimes a caller would simply breathe into the phone before hanging up. Other times there would be brief, cryptic messages. "He's not coming home. Some secrets are worth dying for. You're getting too close." Each call was like a knife wound, reopening the grief that Nathan was trying to process while simultaneously offering a twisted form of hope. Someone knew what had happened to Austin. Someone was watching their family closely enough to know when Nathan's search efforts were intensifying. But who and why? The calls seemed to come at moments when Nathan was making progress in his private investigation, or when media attention to Austin's case was increasing. This suggested that the caller was someone with access to information about the investigation or someone who was monitoring the Reed family's activities closely. Detective Martinez worked with phone company technicians to try to trace the calls, but the caller's use of payphones in different locations made it impossible to establish a pattern or identify a source. The calls came from phone booths throughout the region, sometimes hundreds of miles apart, suggesting either multiple callers or someone who was traveling extensively. The Reed family slowly learned to navigate their new reality. Sarah returned to her job as an elementary school teacher, throwing herself into her work with the kind of determined focus that people use to avoid confronting unbearable pain. Tyler struggled in school, unable to concentrate and frequently getting into fights with classmates who made insensitive comments about his missing brother. Nathan became obsessed with the investigation, turning their basement into a makeshift command center filled with maps, photographs, police reports, and theories about what might have happened to Austin. He spent his evenings poring over every detail, looking for patterns or connections that professional investigators might have missed. The basement command center grew over time to include detailed topographical maps of the search area, photographs of every person who had participated in search efforts, timelines of Austin's final day, and theories about possible scenarios that might explain his disappearance. Nathan had organized everything with the precision of a professional investigator, cross-referencing information and looking for connections that others might have overlooked. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that Nathan first began to suspect that Austin's disappearance might be connected to something closer to home. He had been reviewing the list of volunteers who had helped with search efforts, cross-referencing it with people who lived in their neighborhood or had connections to the family. One name stood out: Marcus Webb, a 52-year-old maintenance worker who lived just 4 houses down from the Reeds on Maple Street. Marcus had been among the first volunteers to offer assistance, and he had participated in multiple search expeditions over the weeks following Austin's disappearance. On the surface, Marcus seemed like exactly the kind of good neighbor that made Millfield such a desirable place to live. He was quiet, kept his property immaculate, and always waved when he saw Nathan or Sarah around the neighborhood. But something about Marcus's eager participation in the search efforts struck Nathan as potentially significant. Why would a man who barely knew the Reed family be so invested in finding Austin? Marcus had no children of his own, no obvious connection to the family beyond residential proximity. His level of involvement seemed disproportionate to his relationship with them. Nathan began paying closer attention to Marcus's behavior and routines. He noticed that Marcus seemed to spend a lot of time working in his front yard, particularly when the Reed family was coming or going. He noticed that Marcus's house had a clear view of the Reed family's backyard, where Austin and Tyler had often played. But the most disturbing observation came when Nathan realized that Marcus owned a pickup truck very similar to several vehicles that had been reported in the area around Crystal Lake during the time period when Austin disappeared. Could it be a coincidence? Or was there a more sinister connection? Nathan began keeping a detailed log of Marcus's activities, noting when he left for work, when he returned home, what days he worked in his yard, and any unusual behavior or visitors. Over several months, Nathan developed a comprehensive picture of Marcus's routines and habits, looking for anything that might connect him to Austin's disappearance. Nathan shared his suspicions with Detective Martinez, who agreed to conduct a discreet investigation into Marcus Webb's background and activities. What they discovered would begin to piece together a horrifying puzzle that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Marcus Webb had a criminal record that included a conviction for child endangerment from 15 years earlier in another state. He had served 18 months in prison and been required to register as a sex offender. But somehow this information had not surfaced during background checks when he moved to Millfield. The registration requirements had lapsed due to bureaucratic errors, and Marcus had successfully concealed his criminal history when applying for employment with the county. More significantly, Marcus worked for the county parks department, giving him detailed knowledge of trail systems, campgrounds, and remote areas throughout the region. His job required him to travel to various locations for maintenance work, providing him with legitimate reasons to be in places where suspicious activity might otherwise be noticed. Detective Martinez obtained a warrant to search Marcus's property, but the search revealed nothing obviously incriminating. Marcus's house was clean and organized. His garage contained normal tools and equipment, and there were no signs of violence or hidden evidence. But Marcus's behavior during the search was telling. He was cooperative but nervous, asking repeated questions about what the investigators were looking for and seeming particularly concerned about certain areas of his property. Most significantly, he volunteered information that hadn't been requested, offering explanations for items or locations that the investigators hadn't yet questioned. The investigation into Marcus Webb continued for several months, but without physical evidence or witness testimony, there was insufficient grounds for an arrest. Detective Martinez was forced to close the active investigation, though he assured Nathan that Austin's case would remain open and that any new evidence would be thoroughly pursued. Nathan felt a crushing sense of defeat. He had been certain that Marcus was involved in Austin's disappearance, but the legal system required proof that simply didn't exist. The anonymous phone calls had stopped shortly after the search of Marcus's property, which Nathan interpreted as confirmation of his suspicions, but it wasn't enough to satisfy the requirements of criminal prosecution. Years passed. Tyler graduated from high school and left for college, eager to escape the shadow of his brother's disappearance and build a life somewhere that didn't constantly remind him of loss and uncertainty. Sarah found some measure of peace through grief counseling and her work with other families of missing children, but the question of what happened to Austin remained an open wound. Nathan never stopped believing that someday, somehow, the truth would emerge. He continued to research cold cases, maintained contact with other families of missing persons, and monitored developments in forensic technology that might eventually provide new investigative possibilities. But as the 10th anniversary of Austin's disappearance approached, Nathan had begun to accept that he might never know what really happened to his son. The physical search efforts had long since ended. The media attention had moved on to other stories, and even close friends had stopped asking about new developments in the case. That's when the confession letter arrived. On a Tuesday morning in October 2015, exactly 14 years after Austin's disappearance, Nathan found an envelope in his mailbox with no return address and his name written in block letters across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered with handwritten text that would finally provide the answers he had been seeking for more than a decade. The letter was from a woman named Eleanor Carver, who identified herself as Marcus Webb's former girlfriend. She explained that she had been living with Marcus in 2001 and had witnessed events that she was now, finally, ready to reveal. According to Eleanor's letter, Marcus had been obsessed with the Reed family for months before Austin's disappearance. He had installed surveillance equipment that allowed him to monitor their backyard activities, and he had made disturbing comments about both Austin and Tyler that had frightened Eleanor at the time. On the day Austin disappeared, Marcus had left their house early in the morning, claiming he was going to work but actually driving to Crystal Lake to wait for an opportunity to approach Austin. Eleanor had discovered this deception when she found detailed maps and camping schedules in Marcus's truck, along with equipment that had no legitimate purpose for his Parks Department job. When Marcus returned home that evening, his clothing was dirty and torn, and there were scratches on his hands and arms that he couldn't adequately explain. More significantly, he had Austin's folding saw in his truck, along with several personal items that Eleanor now realized must have belonged to the missing boy. Eleanor's letter explained that she had been too frightened to come forward at the time, both because of Marcus's increasingly violent behavior toward her and because she feared that her own drug problems would make her an unreliable witness. She had ended their relationship shortly after Austin's disappearance and moved to another state, but guilt and conscience had finally compelled her to reveal what she knew. The letter included specific details about Austin's final moments that had never been made public. According to Eleanor, Marcus had confessed to her that Austin had accidentally discovered an illegal drug distribution operation that Marcus was running from remote locations throughout the Forest Service area. Austin had stumbled upon Marcus and several associates transferring packages between vehicles at a secluded site near the campground. Marcus claimed that Austin had threatened to report what he had seen to authorities, leaving Marcus with no choice but to silence him permanently. Austin had been killed quickly and his body disposed of in a location that would never be found by searchers. Nathan read Eleanor's letter 3 times before the full impact of her words sank in. After 14 years of uncertainty, he finally knew what had happened to his son. Austin had been murdered simply because he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing criminal activity that Marcus Webb was willing to kill to protect. Nathan immediately contacted Detective Martinez, who had since retired but remained interested in Austin's case. Martinez arranged for Eleanor Carver to be interviewed by current investigators, and her story was thoroughly verified through multiple sources and investigative techniques. Eleanor's testimony led to Marcus Webb's arrest on charges of first-degree murder, as well as numerous drug-related offenses that investigators were able to substantiate through records and evidence that had been overlooked during the original investigation. Marcus initially denied all charges, but faced with Eleanor's detailed testimony and physical evidence that had been preserved from the original crime scene, he eventually confessed to Austin's murder. His confession revealed additional horrifying details about his surveillance of the Reed family and his plans to potentially target Tyler as well. During police interviews, Marcus showed no remorse for his actions. He described Austin's death as a necessary business decision and expressed frustration that the boy had forced him to take such drastic action. His complete lack of empathy or understanding of the devastation he had caused confirmed for Nathan that they were dealing with someone who was fundamentally different from normal people. Marcus Webb was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge who presided over his case described the crime as particularly heinous due to the victim's age, the premeditated nature of the surveillance and planning, and the defendant's complete lack of remorse. For Nathan and his family, Marcus's conviction provided a form of closure that they had never expected to receive. They finally knew what had happened to Austin. They knew that his killer would never be free to harm another child. And they knew that Austin's death had not been in vain if it prevented future victims. The truth about Austin Reed's death serves as a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, that the people we trust most can sometimes be the most dangerous, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail when good people refuse to give up hope. The truth about Austin Reed's death serves as a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, that the people we trust most can sometimes be the most dangerous, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail when good people refuse to give up hope. Austin's story changed everything we thought we knew about trust, community, and the people living right next door. 14 years of silence, 14 years of a family's agony, all because one person decided that money was worth more than a child's life. But here's what haunts me the most about this case. How many Marcus Webbs are out there right now? How many neighbors, co-workers, or community members are hiding dark secrets behind friendly smiles and helpful gestures? Austin's story proves that evil doesn't announce itself. It blends in, it volunteers to help, it lives 4 houses down from your family. If this story left you questioning everyone you thought you could trust, you're not alone. That's exactly why I share these cases. Because awareness saves lives. Because the more we understand how predators operate, the better we can protect ourselves and our families. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these crucial true crime investigations. Every subscriber helps us reach more people with stories that could literally save lives. And trust me, the cases I'm working on next will shock you even more than Austin's story. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had a neighbor or community member who gave you strange vibes? Did this story make you think differently about someone in your own life? Share your thoughts, but remember, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Subscribe for more shocking true crime stories that will change how you see the world around you. Hit that like button if this case opened your eyes to something you'd never considered before. And share this video with someone who needs to hear Austin's story, because awareness is the first line of defense against the Marcus Webbs of the world. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, the person watching you might be closer than you think.